Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Ali Gastanian, and I am the director of the I Believe Israeli Women global movement. I Believe Israeli Women, co-founded by Seed the Dream Foundation and Jewish Women International, is a global movement standing in solidarity with Israeli women, men, and children, and fighting the denial of and disinformation about the sexual violence of October 7th. Many of you joining us today are probably deeply aware of the double standard applied to Israeli survivors in the aftermath of October 7th. In fact, this is what most likely drew you to be part of this global movement. But this double standard did not begin on October 7th, 2023. In fact, it has been unfolding for decades. As one of our speakers today, Nicole Lampert, wrote in the piece titled Feminism's Jewish Problem, published in Tablet magazine, the aftermath of October 7th did not create this divide within the feminist movement. Rather, it hardened a fault line that had long existed. Today's webinar gives us an opportunity to explore that history and its consequences. Our panelists today are Nicole Lampert, a British journalist and writer, and Logan Levkoff, an internationally recognized expert of sexuality and relationships and a founding sister of the I Believe Israeli Women global movement. We are especially fortunate to have this conversation expertly moderated by Alana Newhouse, founder and editor-in-chief of Tablet magazine and a founding sister of the I Believe Israeli Women global movement. Thank you again all for being here today, and now I'm pleased to turn it over to Alana.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with everyone today. In addition to being an IBIW founding sister, I'm also a Barnard graduate. And I only bring that up because feminism has come a long way. And it's gone in a direction that I don't think that certainly I was able to see a quarter century ago when I identified as a feminist. Part of what I found so compelling, and I'm really excited to be here to have this conversation, part of what I found so compelling about the piece that started us off here, which I'll describe in a minute, was the way in which it took a very expansive view, did not limit the conversation around feminism and feminism's ideological challenges right now to a post-October 7th world, but actually went hunting in history to see whether or not there was an origin point that was earlier, and in fact found it. So I am joined today. Unfortunately, Zoe couldn't make it with us. We send her our love, and I'm sorry that you guys can't get a chance to meet her. Hopefully, you'll do another webinar, and she'll be able to join for that one. But we are able to be joined today by Nicole Lambert, who is an incredible writer, and she joins us from the UK, although we won't hold that against her. And my friend Logan Lefkoff, who is, I'm sure, known to everybody here, and is just an incredible warrior for certainly stateside, but more broadly. So let's start, because the excuse for this conversation is a piece that Nicole and Zoe Strimple wrote for Tablet. And in that piece, they traced, they basically asked whether or not feminism has a deep problem that needed to be explored. Nicole, talk to me. I know a little bit of this answer, but I actually don't know all of it. Talk to me about why you, and to the extent that you can speak for Zoe or not, just speak for yourself. What happened that made you want to write this piece now? Or how did the piece start coming together? When did it start coming together? What were you looking at in the world that made you feel like it was time to expose some of your own thoughts and feelings?
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me on today. Well, I guess like probably everybody here and certainly the two of you, after October 7, I saw the silence. I was in some feminist groups here, and very quickly they divided the WhatsApp groups, and people couldn't even hold in their hearts for more than, to even say, this is terrible, what's happening. And I was quickly put into another group, which is called Feminist for Israel group, because the other group, they wanted to row about it straight away. And I wrote a piece, which I think was the first piece in Britain about the silence of the feminists, or if they weren't being silent, they were attacking Israel or Jews. The fact was that they had to say something, and it normally was two-siding. And the other side of things was that I was not reporting on the ground, but I was as good as, or as close to as, in that I was speaking to people in their safe rooms on October 7. And thereafter, I was speaking to hostage families from October 8. So kind of fast forward 2 years on, and this was the fault line was getting bigger and bigger. I knew from top feminists in the UK that their own WhatsApp groups had split up, and I was invited to a kind of after event of the kind of top feminist event in the UK, the biggest in Europe. It's called Philia, Feminists in London, something association. It's been going for quite a few years. They had an event a few days after October 7. It wasn't mentioned. The following year, it wasn't mentioned. So I was invited to a kind of fringe event with a few other feminists to go and talk about what had happened on October 7, the hostages, because there wasn't space in the room, and everyone who was volunteering for Philia had been told no one's allowed to mention the war. But so I went there on the Saturday. By then there were already problems, because on the Friday at the opening, Palestine had been mentioned at the opening plenary. One of the speakers said, "I cannot be silent about this genocide," started crying out, "Free Palestine." People started shouting, stop this, because they didn't want feminism to be broken over this. People walked out. Uh, Even that day, I was being messaged by Jewish women who were there, who were like having people come up to them about their Stars of David and how they felt about being complicit in genocide. So we had our event, and actually it was really popular. And as the day had gone on the Saturday, more and more tickets were sold to the point where we were sold out. And even there, actually, as we talked about it, and one of the other speakers was Julie Bindel, who is one of Britain's top feminists. She was talking about how in her WhatsApp group they were rowing over the blood on the pants, the famous crotch of one of the hostages. Um, and they were rowing over, is it rape, and some of them were saying no, that's just from her hands. And to her, to the true feminists, perhaps, you're like, we know what that is. It happens in every war. Why would you say it's not happening in this war? That night, as I made my way home, there was a party, and it actually turned into a fight, into a kind of like a barroom brawl, where you had some feminists surrounding someone who was clearly Jewish with their keffiyehs and their Palestine scarves. And I've seen footage of it, and they're dancing, like disco dancing around her. So someone else who's not Jewish tried to grab the flags off them, and it turned into a fight. People were trying to grab each other's phones. Water was thrown, or a drink was thrown. And then the next day, the two of the people who were kind of on the Zionist side, or they weren't Jewish, they weren't allowed into the conference. At the same time in the conference, I'm sorry to give such a long background, but I suppose it kind of shows us where we are. There was controversy because there was a hijab stand, and there was also controversy because one of the stands was from some people that had been flown over from America, and they had a fanzine, and the first page was something like "Cut open an IDF soldier and you get a Nazi." And because they'd been flown over from America, it then became a big issue because one of them had been a speaker. And it turned out that on her Twitter, she said, "I don't just love Hamas. I don't just like Hamas, I love them." So that was the background. I was telling Zoe about what had happened because it was quite shocking to be at the center of this. And she said, "Well, this isn't the first time this has happened. It's happened with the spare rib controversy, and I'm sure we can talk about that afterwards." But so then we started talking about doing a piece together. I've certainly never done a piece with someone before where we've worked together. We've done our own little bits, but we spoke to some people together, we spoke to other people apart. The more people we spoke to, the bigger it got. I think, Alana, you might remember originally you said about 700 words, and it was, I don't know, we sent over about 3,700 words. Because we just, the more, the kind of, the more people you speak to, the more people you would go to. So I spoke to one feminist, an American, who put me on to Phyllis Chesler's piece about what had happened in Denmark at the UN meeting in 1980, and so that was so that gave us a whole other side to it.
So I want to get into a little bit of the meat of the history here, and I actually just want to get to the heart of my question. But before I do that, Logan, in addition to you having a geographically different perspective from Nicole, which is useful because sometimes it's just even the English speaking world does not necessarily work in concert, and things are culturally very different. But you also have a perspective, you come at this from a different world, from a different set of your own professional and personal alliances and connections. And you've talked a lot about your own story. What I would love for you to do is tell us a little bit about, as Nicole was out there experiencing what she was experiencing, what were you experiencing here, and how did you understand what you were watching happen?
Mm. Such a good question. So I want to just go back a second because this conversation about feminism, and I think it's taken me maybe until this moment to want to share this in this way, or that my brain has figured this out. I feel like the word feminist was my entire identity as a teenager growing up. I was so proud to be a young woman who wrote was the co-writer of the He Said, She Said column in the paper, and wrote for Generation XX at the University of Pennsylvania, and had a Support Vaginal Pride sticker on my loose leaf, which led everyone in my small town and the neighboring towns to refer to me as the lesbian, simply because I had this sticker, right? And I took ownership of that. I felt so proud. It was literally the essence of who I was. And so now I think back to how much of my life I devoted to this mission that I thought had certain core values. And I really have not found the words yet to explain the betrayal of the communities at large, and also this like deep desire to figure out who I was all of these years, who I am now, and what does it mean when this identity that you held so dear, has completely been dismantled. So that's the first thing, because I think that there are a lot of us in this space, that this movement that we were so proud of has really shown its true colors. Historically, now that our eyes have been opened, and definitely in the immediate. So, as someone who's been in the sexuality space, the very progressive world of feminism and rights and queer rights, and indigeneity and bodily autonomy, I have watched these fields that I have spent a lot of time in, 30 years to be precise, maybe even more. October 7th wasn't where it begun. Years ago, and I've often shared, where it became very public and unapologetic in its blatant Jew hatred and hypocrisy, was around May of 21, at the last big, Hamas conflict prior to October 7th. And sitting, on my couch looking at the internet, I was watching groups that claim to stand for bodily autonomy and consent and queer rights flip the David and Goliath paradigm on Israel and Hamas. And in that moment, all of a sudden it gave credence or legitimacy for all of these other people within the sexuality spaces and the women's spaces and the queer rights movements to all of a sudden show their true colors. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how did this happen? Was it always there? Was it something I was missing? Was it a reaction to, and I'm sure this will not win me any points in certain spaces, like the DEIification of our world where only certain people counted? I was trying to figure out what it was all about. And I didn't really come up with an answer aside from, lots of people have deep-seated or have grown up with deep-seated anti-Jewish conspiracy theory, old school anti-Semitism, and it sat and laid dormant for a while, and they just needed a reason for it to come out, right? And here it was. So on October 7th, when I kind of watched my field fall over themselves to justify what was happening. So we saw it in the sexuality spaces where professional organizations, and Tablet was kind enough to write about it. ASECT, which is the biggest, credentialing body in the sexuality space, didn't issue any statement. And when they finally did, it was like a whole lot of all lives matter. The listservs were filled with censoring certain Jewish voices and Zionist voices, but allowing people to talk about colonization and genocide. There was a lot of silence and censorship. And that has continued, right, to this day, where they've taken political statements about some things, but other things don't count. So I'm not surprised. I'm constantly horrified, and it's left a lot of a lot of Jewish sexuality professionals, and certainly those that support us, left on our own island, left on our own to figure it out ourselves.
Okay. So I, we don't really have a lot of time for a really big topic. And I want to ask a couple of hard questions because I want people who are listening to feel like we're going to have a Q&A toward the end of the hour, but before we have the Q&A, I want to see whether or not we can pre-answer some questions that I think are inevitable, basically. One question that we see in the Q&A, for example, I think is a question that naturally lots of people come up with, which is, okay, these people are confused, or some of them are bad actors, but some of them are confused. How do we now change the narrative in these spaces? Change it back, change the narrative to what we want it to be. I want to posit something, and then I'd love for each of you to fight me on it or add. I don't think we can. Nor do I think we want to. I think those spaces are poisoned. They're poisoned for not just us, but for everyone good in the world. And I think that whatever power they have is waning over the next few years. And as an example, I always bring up people who, when I was starting in journalism, one of the biggest outlets at the time of, for example, Tablet's founding was BuzzFeed. It was huge. It was like $1 billion company. It had hundreds of employees. Nobody has actually read anything on BuzzFeed in like 6 years, right? I don't think it's even been, maybe it's been longer. We live in a time where things lose their legitimacy fast and gain legitimacy. And I guess what my question for both of you is, given the history here, do you think that feminist spaces, general feminist spaces that are in historical, the ones with legacy, these conferences, all of these other, did we just lose Nicole? We'll see, maybe we can get her back. Do you think that we could actually save them, or do you think we should abandon them and leave? Logan, you go.
I have to go now.
Yeah.
So I have to be honest, and I agree with you. I think these spaces are lost. And I think that because they are so poisoned, we shouldn't attempt to reassert ourselves into the conversation and try to change them. I think we need to start fresh, control the narrative, and have the people who really want to understand and be a part of what feminism was supposed to be come to us. And I'll just give you an example of how far why I think these spaces are not to be I was going to say trifled with, but no, I have zero interest in being a part of them. When ASECT, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, decided to come up with a new DEI position, which they called JEDI in 2024, the announcement was made that the new person as a quote, queer, Jewish, anti-Zionist, abled, white, cis, mid-sized, polyamorous, pansexual femme. And obviously, the fact that we had to lead with queer, Jewish, anti-Zionist, and then the whole list, right? As if that legitimized the position. I don't want to play in those spaces anymore where you have to be, list your identity qualifications in order to be perceived as good, or, put some kind of, shadow or shame on some of those identifiers to say, like, to apologize for those those things that you are. I think that time has come and gone. And so I have zero interest in being a part of those groups anymore. But that's just me.
And Nicole, I know we lost you there for a second,
All right.
but you heard my question, right? My basic prompt for you is, should we abandon these spaces? Are they too far gone, or do you want to fight for them?
I think I would want to fight for them, and I would say that I think there is a real difference between feminism in the UK and feminism in America. I feel that we probably have more rights than you do. We don't have the abortion fight. I mean, maybe that's going to come here, but we don't have that fight. It's we don't we have things like we have maternity leave for a year. So I think that we have a lot more rights. So in some ways, we perhaps don't need feminism as much as I think you do. But you talked about your early days in journalism, and my early days in journalism were filled with misogyny and bad behaviour, and I would never want to go back to that time. And I suppose almost like contradicting myself, with things like porn and all of that pornification of our society, then we are always going to have to fight a new fight. But in terms of those spaces, one of the things that Julie Bindel pointed out, which I think made it into our piece, was the row within feminism, even without Zionism, between the academic feminists who are much more concerned with left-wing politics and the feminists who are doing the stuff on the ground. And I think that they have split along those lines. So the academic feminists are the ones who are actually doing rape denial or trying to find excuses for it and are obsessed with the victim versus the oppressor. Whereas the ones who
But I
don't
want
on
to
the
I want to
ground,
push you on something, right?
yeah,
If part of because I think that you're first of all, I think you're right. I also think that the space of British feminism has some very high profile sane people, which
yeah.
is it's a relief, right? And you just feel like, okay, it's not like a bunch of nutcases that you're joining in every single organization, which does mark it as different. I don't know that we have that many of those on the US side, and the US side is very partisan and very it's a little wackier. Um, but the thing that I guess I want to get at is getting at Logan's point, which is, was the fundamental decision, or is the fundamental decision, to fight for a kind of person ultimately the gateway to all identity politics? And does it ultimately lead us, no matter what our intentions are, no matter how good our intentions are, if you're theoretical about it, does it lead you down the path of ever increasing pronouns and sub-identities and purity tests that we now see going on the left?
I think we see that, but I think you might have mentioned that I think that may be disappearing somewhat. Sorry, that was someone trying to call me on my phone. Can you see me? Um, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, yeah, my laptop broke and now my someone's
Well,
calling time
if
from my
if
phone.
if
Yeah.
if our husbands
Yeah.
are still annoying us, then we
Yeah.
obviously still have fights that we have to have here.
There are definitely I'm not interested in the academic feminism so much really and never have been. And I think that in both our countries we're seeing the fight against DEI and all of that and pronouns. And I think that is part of feminism too. That can be a feminist row within itself. And certainly that's happened in the UK, a massive fight against, for example, the use of pronouns. So again, I'm not willing to give up that fight. And I do, and as you say, I think we do have sane people here, and there are other rows going on too, particularly over the role of Islam in feminism, whether it has a place. You know, I mentioned the hijab stand, and that's kind of at the key of that, which is related to us, but also its own separate row. So I think that, you know, we do have things to fight in there, and that we do have enough people. Certainly, there's an organisation that started here, Feminists Against Anti-Semitism. They're mainly not Jews, because we are. The other thing, the difference between us is that we are an even smaller minority than you are in America.
Right. Right.
So we need their help. We as a tiny community here, we can't do it on our own.
So my question then is, let's go back and analyze the institutions, because there are a lot of people, I assume actually people who are listening to this have associations with institutions or parts of the movement. And I think that they'd like to understand a little more about how you think it went wrong in some of those spaces. And this is a question for both of you. How do you feel, particularly, you can talk about this after October 7th, but I also know that the point of your piece was that there were seeds of this much earlier. So can you just talk a little bit about, just autopsy the problem here? How did October 7th push at a fracture that was already ideologically there and create the rupture that we all witnessed?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would say that we in the UK probably had it earlier, and we certainly had it in a big way with Corbynism, which was the leader of the Labour Party, who's a real anti-Zionist. So in some ways, we as a Jewish community, we had to come together and fight much earlier, from about 2015, 2016, when he became leader, and Zionism was anti-Zionism was mainstreamed. And just to give the background on it, because it is so fascinating, it was seeded by the USSR. So you saw that in Mexico when they first announced, and this was at the feminist conference, where they first had said that Zionism is racism. Repeated again in 1980, again at the women's conference. So this is partly female conferences being hijacked by male issues, although they are female issues too.
Hang on, Nicole, just stay with that for one more minute. It's an
Yeah.
important point that I think people don't understand, which is I think people don't realize the extent to which what they're seeing right now was manufactured. It wasn't organic. It was a manufactured strategy that actually was manufactured, and the template for which is based in the Soviet Union. Can you give us just dive us into the history? There's a good part of this that's in your piece, which we put in the chat, but dive us into the history just a tiny bit so people feel grounded in that.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend anyone who wants to find out more reads Isabella Tabarovsky. I know she's written for you, and she's the kind of almost like the guru of this world, and she's got a book actually which is for students, but really it's for all of us. And it takes us back to that time, and I interviewed her, and she talked about how when she saw this Zionism as colonialism, all this stuff, when she first saw, maybe in 21 or maybe earlier, she was like, I've seen this before, it's from the Soviet Union. So there were two reasons why the Russians decided to kind of make Zionism their hated word. One was internally because the Jewish community, even though they were trying to wipe out all religion, at the same time, your ethnicity was still Jewish and you still experienced anti-Semitism, and people were unhappy with that. So the communist utopia hadn't happened. And then when Israel started doing well in wars, these people who had been deprived of kind of any sort of pride in their Judaism for the first time felt it. And then externally, they didn't want to be like the Nazis and anti-Semites, so they turned Zionism into the new Jew, basically. And then they used that as a way to basically turn the left and certain countries against the West, which was backing Zionism. So Zionism became attached to words like colonialism, genocide. These are all phrases that are really old. The ironic thing is that the USSR died, 30 years ago, but the language it gave us is stronger than ever. So it was seeded through communist literature, left-wing literature, left-wing academic circles, all these conferences through the UN. And then famously in 2001, just before 9/11, there was a conference in Durban where people from the West were absolutely shocked at how racist and anti-Semitic this event was. I think quite a few countries before it happened, they then refused to go. Isabella Sabrowski's on there. Um, um, so that was how it was seeded, and that has continued to grow along with identity politics and all the things. It's all coalesced around what was known as Zionology, this study of creating hatred of Zionism. It's absolutely fascinating. Like the more you get into it, the more fascinating it is. They used like fascist literature to create their new hatred of the Jew, which is why, like literally today, I was writing about left wing and right wing because we've got an election coming up, just a small election, and they're both like candidates for both parties of the extremes are saying the same thing. The Jew did it, but the Zionists did it.
Logan, talk to me about how when all of this stuff started to trickle down to you in your life, and you can get as personal about your own experience as or as not. At what point did you start to ask yourself if what you were seeing was organic or if what you were seeing was like not from this time space continuum? And so talk to me about sort of how because you came to understand something about yourself and your own politics that I wonder if it wouldn't be useful for people to hear. So tell us a little bit about your journey and understanding how these pressures, these broader pressures came to bear on your own mind and
Ah,
ideas.
it's so funny. I never really imagined that like the label Jewish or Zionist was going to be the thing I was going to lead with in this chapter of my life. Like it never occurred to me. My big, bold, provocative title was always sexologist, right? That was the thing people always cared about. And I spent the first 15, 20 years of my career getting a lot of hate and nasty messages because I was a woman who talked about sex publicly, right? So I got used to being called every name in the book, and it thickens your skin up really quickly. What I started to see, I think, was this absolute, and I said it before, this betrayal of the issues that I thought we all agreed upon, right? And I feel, and Lana, I think I know what you're referring to. I have a lot of guilt, to be honest, over participating in a field that I believed we were all in it for the same reasons. I wanted to give a space and a voice to everyone, for everyone to see, to be validated and to be heard and to be respected. I never, ever believed that fringe ideologies, in every sense, in every realm, were going to dominate the center and dominate the policies. And what I have found is, um, I have found that well, as you know, I was fired. I I was fired for a sexuality gig that I had been in for over 20 years at a school that I was very proud to be working in, only to find out that I was the target of a Zionist witch hunt. People were very concerned that I was a public Jew online. And despite the fact that I don't teach Middle East history, obviously, that was, something too hard for people to understand and get past. And what happened is I was fired clearly on an egregious pretext for a retweet after months of being monitored in my classroom, months of clearly having my social media monitored, all starting because she's a Zionist, because a parent was making phone calls to other parents. Um, I was fired for retweeting a trans woman who was criticizing the roots of a movement. Particularly, I was fired for retweeting Brianna Wu, who was saying that her movement had been hijacked by people like Judith Butler, who supported Hamas. So I wound up being fired for retweeting a trans woman who was defending the Jewish community and her own community, by the way, from these fringe movements. And I was told I violated inclusivity. So I have a lot of I have I have a lot of feelings about what is taking place, but I think it gets back to the question that you had asked: can these spaces be saved? And the answer for me, again, is no. Because here, and I think back to what you said, Nicole, about like the difference between academia and being on the ground, because what I'm even seeing on the ground are things like signs that say reproductive justice includes Palestinian liberation. Birth work and abortion doulas are a Palestinian liberation issue. And those are obviously there has been funding and it comes from somewhere for sure, but I am really not just, I don't think the word is afraid. I think fear is done. But I know that it's in the activist communities too. It's not just in academia because I see it. There was a time when my daughter was 18 months old. I took her to her first pro-choice rally with Chicks for Choice written on her face, and I was so proud of this picture we took together. I would never do that again because I know what's going to be standing next to me, and it's going to say that, it's going to say something horrible about Jews and my right to exist.
So let's in the last 10 minutes before we open this up for questions, I would love for you each to help people parse through or know what the dance steps are for parsing through their own feelings and intentions in their actions. So for example, there are a lot of women who I know who were pretty proud, if relatively minor, donors to the National Organization of Women. That was a very proud association for people, or NARAL, right? But in many ways, it was also offloading your feminism. So you could call yourself a feminist, believe yourself to be a strong feminist, because somebody else was taking care of it and representing you and doing the work that you believed in and contributed to in some way. One of the interesting things about what Nicole said before, which is definitely borne out by my own experience, is that the feminism that I recognize is also the hardest feminism to manifest, which is the people who actually go and do work locally and actually spend their time bringing services to humans that they meet in real life. Once you are already in the space of activism and offloading, like, to me, all those spaces are really problematic now. So my question for you two is, can we help people, many of whom I assume lots of people on this who are listening to this have jobs. They have other things to do with their life. Like they have pressures and lives. right? If they care about this issue and care about feminism and are concerned about how to engage in ways that are helpful, not just be anxious and outraged and upset, how could they A, change their thinking, and B, change their action? So it's a question for both of you, but Nicole, you can go first, and then Logan, I'd love for you to answer it too.
First, I just want to say, I mean, it's frightening what's happened to Logan, absolutely terrifying. And so of course that's a starting place in which people makes people more frightened. If you can lose your job for something like that. Um, for me, I guess, I have been one of those offloading feminists, sort of, but try and live my life in a feminist way, by, if I can, being there for other women and mentoring female journalists. Um, so doing it in that way, and so one of the reasons I started writing about anti-Semitism from being a showbiz reporter is because I wanted to teach one person what was going on in the Corbyn era, in the hope that they could then pass it on to someone else. So in some ways, it doesn't need to be big, showy feminism. It's about, for me, I have two boys, giving them the right values in life, making sure that they treat the women in their life well. It's because I have, a voice on social media. It's about using that voice where I can. But obviously, I wouldn't want anyone to lose their job. But I think it's also about holding each other up and making each other braver. And I think you're right that almost we can get too downtrodden in the silence of the feminists. But actually, we've also got to look around and see that there are lots of good feminists that are standing with us. Not just Jews, like for the piece we spoke to Lieki, she's not Jewish. And there are other women like her in different feminist movements that are on our side. And so it's standing with them. So it's just finding the right people to ally with. I think that's the most important thing, and finding allies where we can. For example, for Feminists Against Anti-Semitism, I spoke to Iranian women about what was going on there, and I'm sure it's happened in America too. But in the UK, Iranians and Jews have formed a really strong alliance, and their women are just as incredible as the Jewish women. They are fabulous and glamorous and clever. And what's happened there, there's also been a huge amount of silence about the kind of sexual violence, but also the way that they are treated in Iran. That should be like almost like a top feminist element, where women are being killed because they don't want to wear their hijab. There's nothing more feminist than that in some ways, in that movement. But there was silence over that, which almost pre the women life freedom movement, which was very quiet, almost was a forerunner of the silence of October 7.
Yeah. Logan, I think.
So despite it all, despite my professional situation, I would say this: I will never be silent, ever. Ever. And I know that speaking up comes at a cost for all of us. And I would still say, in this moment in time, there is no time like now to speak up. And so for me, feminism, my version of feminism, is about being brave and bold. And that doesn't mean it has to be in these big, giant ways. Sometimes it means talking to the people in your life or in your home. Sometimes it means talking to someone at work. Sometimes it means finally responding online. We do not have the luxury of being silent. And I don't think we need to take someone else's crumbs and their own definition of what feminism is. We have an opportunity now to define it for ourselves, right? And if everyone on this webinar left and wrote something and said, feminism to me is, right? And posted it and redefined it so that we don't give it to someone else to say, you're not good enough, you don't fit. I think we would really be onto something. And not that I'm giving anyone homework, but I feel like I have zero interest in being perceived as good if good means that I have to give up the things that I hold dear and I believe in. And I think we need to start being a little bit bad, all of us, and being okay with that. And to me, that's a super cool new rebranded feminism?
I think just it's partly about getting over being called all these hateful words. And I think certainly for me that like, being a bit older, I'm able to overcome that. And it's harder when you're younger and you're being told all the time you're a genocide lover, apartheid lover, all of that. And it's about being brave, and that's why we have to hold each other as well as being out there in the wider world, I would say.
I agree. And I think that part of the thing that we lost somewhere along the way is this idea that a lot of the things that a lot of these issues, when they began in earnest, when activism around them began in earnest, they were minority or fringe views, and it was hard to hold them. And we now want everyone to accept us. We're mad that everyone says Israel is a genocide, like that they're committing genocide, that they're horrible, that they're colonialists. But this is what it meant to do activism. It meant actually to be the minority that was the thorn in the side of everyone else, where the majority did not like you and was against you. And I think that realizing that and getting okay with it, activism's not for everyone. And it's okay if that's too uncomfortable for you. But I think that that is, to me, this feels pretty natural that this would be the next step in our activism.
So one
Um,
of the things, oh, sorry,
yeah,
Alana,
no,
one of
go
the things
ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say was, and I feel like I've said this before, but it bears repeating. It is really easy to feel beaten down in times like these, but um, I really believe we were made for these moments. We were made for moments like this. There is no one who knows better how to deal with the situation that we are living in than us. And this is an opportunity for us to be actionable with our values and show everyone else what feminism really is. And so we should consider this an awesome opportunity to tap back into the skills that perhaps we haven't had to use in a while.
I'm going to bring up some questions from the crowd. And anybody, feel free. There are a lot of comments, and so I'm just going to skip over them, but we'll make sure that all the panelists read them so they see your thoughts on all these various topics. But I'm going to read a couple of questions, put other ones in the chat as you guys have them. Um, One question was, are any of the well-known feminists that were part of the original women's movement, are any of them aware of the issues that we're talking about today? And I'm going to add to that question and say, even if they weren't necessarily the original founders, I think it's an interesting question about the original founders. But even if they weren't part of the original founders, what how should we think about high profile or celebrity feminists basically in this space? Either one of you can answer that.
Well, one of the feminists that we spoke to for the piece was Sheila Jeffreys, who was involved in the spare rib controversy, in that um, she she's not Jewish, and she was part of a. And I guess if you're thinking back to kind of 1960s, 70s, it's
Mhm.
the post-Holocaust era. So she was part of a feminist against anti-Semitism group then because she was interested in learning about the Holocaust, and it wasn't something that was taught in school at that time. And she was very involved in the spare rib activity, which basically, because we haven't really talked about it, but people can read about it, but it involved Zionists being told you can't write for us, you can't even write letters for us. Spare Rib was a feminist magazine. And so she kind of helped lead she helped to lead a group that kind of was outside Spare Rib's offices, and she was, and so we did speak to her. Certainly, she walked out of Philia on the day that they started doing the Free Palestine stuff. She had her own problems with them, and that she's also been no platform by them. She said that she'd had her own party. So someone like her is on our side. And Julie Bindel, who I mentioned, who's one of Britain's best known feminists, she's a journalist and activist, and she's been fantastic. You couldn't ask for a better ally.
I also put in the chat a really terrific piece that Tablet published a few days ago by Cara Gisela about Gloria Greenfield and why she left the feminist movement decades ago and how she really looks prophetic these days. I think it's worth for a lot of us that have sort of this inherited idea of what feminism is, I think it's really worth looking at Gloria's experience. And there's a fantastic new movie coming out about her. Logan, any thoughts on like because it's also like an interesting idea of like high profile or celebrity figures and what role they play. In the US, I don't know if maybe I'm just not thinking straight this morning, but I can't think of any that feel moving to me.
No, nothing, no, nothing seriously moving or remotely prophetic. I mean,
Fine.
I give credit to a lot of people who come forward and put their careers and lives online. There's no question that they deserve some shine for that. I fear though that oftentimes when big voices come forward, it's with a lot of equivocation about the government in Israel, right? There always has to be something, some kind of caveat to the statement that people make. And that is, and I think that just goes to show us how desperately people want to be perceived as still good, even when they know that, you know, fighting for Israeli people when Hamas sexually assaulted them is bad. Like there's no conversation to be had. But look, I think that there were a lot of people who decided to speak out when it was more convenient to speak out on October 8th and beyond. I'm more interested in the people who were always out there shining a light on what was happening in their industries. That being said, it's all hands on deck. So everyone's voice matters in this. So it doesn't make a difference whether or not I'm irritated pre-October 7th. What matters is now and moving forward.
Can I ask, do you mind if I ask, Logan, have you, or either of you really, have you seen a split within feminism in America in terms of with non-Jews on the side of the kind of Jewish side? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
Um,
so it's not us against them type of thing. It's a kind of split in the movement, which is
oh
maybe
yeah, but I think that I mean, and this actually goes to sort of to an actual other question, which is, let me see if I can find it. It was a question to Logan about whether or not she thinks the hostility to Jewish feminists that she experienced within sexuality spaces parallels the hostility to TERFs. Perhaps these spaces are in fact partisan rather than inclusive. Um, I think that in my experience of US feminist spaces, there are a lot of non-Jewish feminists or former feminists that have come to understand that actually what those feminist organizations had become was arms of the Democratic Party. They were not actually activist groups. They were partisan groups, which is different. And that I think started to feel uncomfortable, even for people who saw themselves as liberals. They didn't like the fact that their activist groups were partisan. They wanted them to be nonpartisan and actually fight for the issue. And I think that started to make people uncomfortable.
And I think political homelessness is kind of similar to what I mentioned before about like us, we need to redefine what feminism is. We need to sort of like get rid of the old and in with the new. I feel the same way about politics too, right? That we've lost the plot, that it is impossible to exist in these polls, which always meet a Jew hatred for some reason or another. And we need a new system. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that it's going to be on any of us on this webinar to do a whole political upheaval. But I do think that, again, like this is where individual voices matter. And to be able to come forward and say, these are my values, and what I'm witnessing is not aligned with my values. And it's a really scary thing to do that. It's a really scary thing to say that these organizations or these parties or these groups that I have been so aligned, that I thought were aligned with me, that I've given my existence and my money and my activism to, do not work for me anymore. That is part of being bold, is to be able to say that out loud, and deal with whatever comes next. But I will say that for me, there has not been nothing more impactful than being able to look in the mirror and know that I have operated with the utmost integrity, and that I can be a model for my kids on how to do tough things, and that I can look in the mirror and also say, like, I'm trying to become the person my ancestors wanted me to be. And so if that means getting a little banged up along the way, so be it.
I have only two last questions for you guys. One of which is a hard extension of what you just said, a little challenging extension, and the other one is a broader way to leave everyone, I think, with some thoughts that might be helpful. The first one is a question from the crowd, which is, how should, if at all, the Jewish feminist movement confront the main root of Jew hate today, Islamist anti-Zionism? It strikes me that the Jewish feminists publicly demonstrating solidarity with the many oppressed Muslim women in the world could be a useful way for feminism to start fresh and demonstrate what genuine feminism is supposed to be. So, the challenge of Islamism looks a little different across in different countries, but maybe not as different as some people think. What do you guys think about how we deal with the challenge of Islamism?
It's such a big question, isn't it? And it's particularly big in the UK, I would say. And as I kind of mentioned, it's something that is already another schism in the feminist movement, how we deal with that. As I mentioned, standing with the Iranian women is a totemic way of doing that, because they are standing up against one of the harshest forms of Islamism, and they are doing that valiantly. And I think what Logan said, we have to kind of stick with our values, whilst also recognizing that, within Judaism, there is also misogyny, particularly, with more conservative forms and things like that. So actually, doing the research, I spoke to someone who'd been at university in the 1980s, and they'd at that point felt thrown out of the feminist movement. But another reason why they set up their own group was because they were also dealing with misogyny within Judaism. So I've gone slightly off topic there, but I think that we, almost as women of faith, whether we are religious or not, but people who come from a patriarchal religion, we're able to talk about that in a salient way, and it's about choosing the right women to ally with, and certainly there are Muslim women that I talk to and that I try and ally with, and they are often women, even though they're still within their faith, they probably don't wear a hijab, and they're fighting misogyny within their own faith too. So again, it's about kind of being allies when we need to be.
I
I
have
think
one
it's,
last,
oh,
wait one second.
sorry.
I have one last question, which I really think is the right way to end. One of our attendees said, "How can I even call myself a feminist anymore?" Does she need to? What do you guys think? Logan?
I don't think anyone needs to use the word feminist anymore. Not because it didn't serve a purpose once. I don't think it serves a purpose today. I think that we have a lot of labels, and maybe it's part of my worry about identity politics, but I think that word comes with a lot of baggage that we in a post-October 7th world do not need and don't need to stand for. So I don't think the word necessarily needs to be replaced with something else. We are individuals that stand for certain things. And what I would be more interested in is, instead of saying, I am no longer, sorry, instead of using the term feminist, is for us to be able to explain to people why we no longer would call ourselves that, the rationale behind it.
See, I completely disagree. And actually, someone just a comment just posted up, which I was kind of going to respond as well, which is, I call myself a feminist because I believe in equal rights for women. And I call myself a Zionist because I believe in the state of Israel, the existence of it. And until people stop fighting those things, then I will identify as those things. So there is still a fight for rights, and there's still a fight against people who say that Israel shouldn't exist. So really, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to use those words. And there is an argument again not to use the word Zionist because Israel exists. But while there's anti-Zionism, perhaps we need to be out and proud feminist Zionists.
That's a great way to end. And I really want to say that there's so much here. I know that IBIW is going to be, I'm going to turn this over to Ali to say goodbye, but I know that she's going to take us out of here. But I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And I really want to thank Logan and Nicole for giving everybody an hour of their brilliance and sensitivity and just all around fabulousness. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilana. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Logan, Alana, Nicole. This was a really wonderful and thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. These webinars are designed to equip the I Believe Israeli women community with the information that you all need to push back against the denial and disinformation about sexual violence of October 7th. So we really encourage you to carry this conversation forward by sharing what you've learned today and amplifying this work. I want to thank everyone again for your engagement and your continued support of the I Believe Israeli Women Global Movement, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.